Houston, Texas, a scorching Tuesday in September when the air hangs heavy and still. A 40-year-old excavator operator named Michael Anthony Reyes lowers the bucket into the baked earth for the 100th time that morning, only for the machine to lock up again and again, refusing to dig deeper. Frustrated, he climbs down and grabs a shovel, expecting rock or pipe. Instead, 3 meters beneath the surface, he uncovers a perfectly preserved 6-foot statue of the Virgin Mary, her face serene and untouched by time, as if she has been waiting in the dirt for him specifically. What happens next will shatter his numbness, heal a body and heart he thought broken forever, and turn an abandoned backyard into a place of quiet pilgrimage that no one, least of all Michael, can explain. Before we continue, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let's see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary have reached. And if you haven't yet joined our family, subscribe now, because here, each day, we witness the tender love and mighty power of the Mother of God. Michael Anthony Reyes was the kind of man who had learned to live inside a silence, so complete it muffled even his own thoughts. At 40, he woke every morning before the alarm in his one-bedroom apartment that felt more like a motel room than a home. Everything functional, nothing personal, no photos on the walls, no plants struggling for light, not even a forgotten coffee mug in the sink to suggest someone actually lived there. He would pour black coffee into the same thermos he had carried for 18 years, strong enough to strip paint, but never sweetened because sweetness was a luxury he had stopped allowing himself long ago. Then he would step out into the pre-dawn humidity without a word to anyone, because there was no one left to say words to. His days unrolled in the cab of an excavator on Houston's endless construction sites, digging trenches for pipes that would carry water and power to homes he would never see inside. His hands bore calluses like maps of forgotten battles, knuckles scarred from slips and scrapes that never quite healed right. Co-workers knew him as the reliable one who showed up early, worked late, and never complained, but they also knew to leave him alone because the air around him carried a quiet warning. Do not ask. Do not get close. Do not expect conversation beyond what the job required. 4 years earlier, Sofia Reyes had walked out after trying everything to reach the man she married when they were both 22 and full of plans. She had packed quietly while he sat in the living room staring at nothing, her final words hanging in the air like smoke. You're here, Michael, but you're not. It's like loving a shadow. He hadn't argued, hadn't begged, hadn't even stood up to help her carry the bags. He just nodded and watched the door close behind her, then sat in the silence until it became the only thing he knew how to live with. But the silence hid something darker, something that clawed at him from the inside out every waking hour. Pain. Not the kind that comes and goes like a headache or a pulled muscle, but the relentless, bone-deep agony of a herniated disc at L4, L5 that had started with a bad lift on a rainy job site and grown into a monster that dictated every movement. The specialists in their white coats had been blunt. Surgery is your best option, Mr. Reyes. But with the location and severity, there's a real risk. Partial paralysis, loss of leg function, you might never walk right again. He had stared at the MRI films, black and white ghosts of his own spine, and asked the other question. What if I don't cut? The doctor's sigh had said everything before the words. The pain will worsen. You'll need stronger meds, opioids probably. Eventually, you won't be able to work. Quality of life, it won't be good. Michael chose the pain because the alternative felt like gambling with legs that were the only thing still carrying him through the days. His co-workers saw the winces when he climbed out of the cab, the way he favored his right side. But no one spoke of it because Michael was not the kind who accepted pity or pills. I'm fine, he would grunt when someone noticed. Just slept wrong. Always the same lie, told with eyes that dared anyone to push further. That it was on that Tuesday in September, under a sun that turned the Houston suburbs into a shimmering oven, when the routine finally cracked. The site was a sprawling commercial complex rising from what used to be scrubland on the city's edge, months of dirt and deadlines. Michael had been in the excavator since 7, bucket biting into the earth and dumping tons into waiting trucks with the mechanical rhythm that had become his only prayer. His mind wandered in the cab's heat, to Sophia's last smile, to the empty apartment waiting like judgment, but his body knew the work without thinking. Around 10, the bucket locked up mid-dig. Not the grind of engine failure or overheating, but a stubborn refusal, as if the ground itself had decided enough was enough. Michael cursed under his breath, tried again. Same result. He killed the ignition, climbed down, and peered into the trench. Nothing obvious. Dark soil, scattered rocks, the usual. But when he crouched closer, something pale gleamed 3 meters down, too smooth for stone, too curved for debris. Victor Gonzalez, the site engineer, strode over with his hard hat tucked under one arm and impatience written across his face. "What's the holdup, Reyes?" "Something down there. Machine won't go through." Victor squinted into the hole. "Probably bedrock or old concrete. These sites are full of ghosts." "Doesn't look like either." Victor sighed. "Then dig it out by hand. We're behind schedule as it is." Michael grabbed a shovel, called 2 laborers over, and they went at it while sweat poured and the sun laughed. With every scoop, more of the thing emerged. White, sculpted, human-shaped. "My God," one worker whispered, crossing himself. Michael dug carefully now, breath coming harder not from effort, but from a feeling he couldn't name. Finally, the form lay bare. A statue of the Virgin Mary, 6 feet tall, old but perfect, as if time itself had decided to leave her alone. He stepped back, shovel dangling forgotten from his hand, staring at the serene face that looked back at him with eyes that seemed to see straight through the walls he had built around his heart. The trench fell silent except for the low hum of distant generators and the thud of Michael's own pulse in his ears. 6 feet of carved marble lay exposed to the Texas sun for the first time in who knows how many decades. A woman in a flowing mantle, veil framing a face of impossible gentleness, hands clasped in prayer at her breast, bare feet resting on a crescent moon and a serpent crushed beneath them. Every fold of the robe looked soft enough to stir in the breeze that wasn't blowing. Every finger was delicate, every fingernail etched with the precision of a master who had loved his subject more than his craft. And the face, closed eyes, faint smile, the kind of peace that made the men standing around it feel suddenly loud and clumsy and unworthy. Before we continue, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let's see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary have reached. And if you haven't yet joined our family, subscribe now, because here, each day, we witness the tender love and mighty power of the Mother of God. Victor Gonzalez crossed himself twice, then remembered he was the engineer and tried to look professional. "Somebody call the office. We've got. I don't know what we've got." Phones came out. Cameras clicked. Word traveled faster than the heat. The crew that had been joking about cold beer 5 minutes earlier now stood in a loose circle, hard hats in hands, speaking in whispers. One of the younger laborers, a kid from San Antonio who still went to Mass with his abuela, fell to his knees right there in the dirt and started praying the Hail Mary out loud in Spanish. The others didn't laugh. Something about the statue made laughter feel suddenly far away. Michael couldn't move. He had seen religious statues before, plastic virgins in truck stop dashboards, faded plaster saints in his mother's old bedroom, but never anything like this. This one looked alive in a way that hurt to stare at for too long. The marble was cool even under the brutal sun, unmarked by root or worm or the slow rot of underground years. No cracks, no chips, no discoloration. Only a faint dusting of red Texas clay that brushed off like talcum powder, revealing skin so luminous it seemed lit from within. Someone later swore there were tiny flecks of gold in the mantle that caught the light like stars, though no expert could ever find them again. Victor cleared his throat. "All right, we need to figure out what this is. Old cemetery? Some rich family's private chapel that got paved over in the 70s. The company historian was called. Records were pulled. Nothing. No church, no cemetery, no historical marker within miles. The land had been ranch pasture until the 1950s, then sold off for development. Whoever had buried a 6-foot Carrara marble Madonna 3 meters deep had done it deliberately, lovingly, and then erased every trace of WHYBY noon. The site's superintendent arrived with the owner's representative. Offers were made on the spot. A local parish wanted to buy it. An antiques dealer from Dallas quoted $25,000 sight unseen. A museum curator spoke of carbon dating and provenance. Michael listened to the numbers swirl around him like flies and felt something tighten in his chest that had nothing to do with his back. He heard himself say words he hadn't planned. "She's not for sale." Victor stared at him. Reyes, you don't own the land. I found her, Michael answered, voice rough. She stopped the machine for me. The men around him shifted uncomfortably, but no one argued. Something in his eyes made argument feel pointless. They wrapped her carefully in moving blankets, lifted her out with the crane as gently as if she were made of glass instead of stone, and laid her in the bed of Michael's pickup like a sleeping queen. The crew watched in silence as he drove away, dust plume rising behind him like incense. That night, he didn't go to the apartment. He pulled into the driveway of the little house he still owned but hadn't lived in since Sophia left, the one with the overgrown backyard where the weeds grew taller than the fence. He backed the truck up to the gate, wrestled the statue down alone, ignoring the white-hot stab in his spine, and carried her through the yard like a bride across a threshold that had never expected one. He laid her on the cracked patio, sat on the single plastic chair that hadn't yet rotted, and stared at her under the security light until the sky began to pale that he didn't sleep. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that face, serene, knowing, patient. And for the first time in years, the pain in his back was joined by another pain, deeper, older. The memory of his mother Elena, dead 12 years now of the cancer that ate her slowly while she still managed to smile and pray her rosary every night for her only son who had stopped answering her calls. He had buried her rosary with her because he couldn't bear to touch it afterward. He had buried everything that reminded him of faith, of softness, of the possibility that someone up there might care. Now faith, or something like it, had been dug up and laid at his feet, 6 feet of cold marble that somehow felt warmer than anything he had touched in years. The next morning, Michael woke on the patio floor with the statue's shadow falling across his face like a blessing he hadn't asked for. His back should have been a furnace of agony after sleeping on concrete, yet the usual knife twist was only a dull throb, as if someone had turned the volume down on pain itself. He sat up slowly, half expecting the night to have been a heatstroke dream, but there she stood, the Virgin unearthed, marble gleaming in the early light, eyes still closed, hands still folded, waiting. Before we continue, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let's see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary have reached. And if you haven't yet joined our family, subscribe now, because here, each day, we witness the tender love and mighty power of the Mother of God. He spent the day off work, first unscheduled day in 8 years, clearing the jungle that had once been a backyard. He hacked at waist-high weeds with a machete borrowed from his neighbor, hauled rusted lawn chairs and broken toys left by the previous tenants, filled 3 contractor bags with beer cans and fast food trash. Sweat poured, muscles screamed, but the pain in his spine stayed strangely quiet, as if listening to instructions from somewhere else. By dusk, the ground was bare red clay. He stood panting, hands on knees, and felt her gaze on the back of his neck even though her carved eyes remained closed. That night, he dreamed for the first time in years. Not the usual gray fragments of half-sleep, but a dream so vivid he could smell it. He was back in his mother's little house in a leaf, the one with plastic on the furniture and the statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe on the television. Elena Reyes knelt on the living room carpet, rosary sliding through fingers swollen from chemo, whispering the same petition every decade. For my son Michael, that his heart not stay buried forever. In the dream, he tried to tell her he was sorry, but no sound came. Then the room filled with the scent of roses, impossible, overpowering, and his mother looked up smiling, tears shining. Behind her stood the marble Virgin from the trench. Only now her eyes were open and fixed on him with a tenderness that broke something loose inside his chest. He woke gasping at 3:17 a.m., the exact hour his mother used to say belonged to Mary. The backyard was dark, cicadas loud, and the air thick with the same rose perfume from the dream. He stumbled outside barefoot. The statue stood bathed in moonlight, and for one heartbeat, he would have sworn her lips curved just a fraction more than yesterday. Then the scent was gone, leaving only Texas humidity and the sound of his own ragged breathing. Friday, he returned to the site long enough to collect his paycheck and tell Victor he was taking personal days. Victor started to argue about schedules, looked at Michael's face, and simply nodded. On the way home, Michael stopped at Home Depot, then at a Catholic supply on Bissonnette, a store he hadn't entered since his first communion. He bought concrete mix, rebar, a level, and 50 bags of garden soil without knowing why. The cashier, an older Vietnamese woman wearing a miraculous medal, rang him up in silence until the total flashed. When she saw the statue waiting in the truck bed, she crossed herself and refused his credit card. For her, she said softly. Free. Saturday and Sunday, he worked from sunrise to collapse. He poured a circular concrete pad in the center of the yard, perfectly level, 8 feet across. He built a low brick knee wall around it like an altar. He hauled the statue, 300 pounds of marble, across the grass alone, muscles tearing, back screaming warnings that never quite arrived, and set her dead center. When he stepped back, hands bleeding from brick cuts, the pain that had ruled his life for years was simply quieter. Not gone, but listening. Monday, he drove to a nursery in Pasadena where the owner, Mrs. Delgado, specialized in antique roses. He didn't know varieties, didn't care about zones or pruning schedules. He only knew he needed roses. Lots of them. White for purity, red for love, the colors his mother used to pin to the May altar every spring. Mrs. Delgado walked him through rows of blooming bushes, explaining Maggie and Belinda's dream and Pope John Paul II. But Michael's eyes kept drifting to the oldest section, where the heritage roses grew wild and fragrant. He bought 30 plants, more than the yard could reasonably hold, and Mrs. Delgado threw in 5 climbing New Dawn for free, whispering, "She likes to reach for heaven." He planted until his palms blistered and the sun set crimson behind the pecan trees. When the last rose was in the ground, he stood filthy, exhausted, and, for the first time since childhood, happy. The statue looked different surrounded by living color. Smaller somehow, yet more present, as if the flowers had always belonged to her and were simply coming home. That night he sat on the back step with a beer he didn't drink, staring at the white figure glowing under the security light. He tried to pray, awkward, halting words about being sorry, about missing his mom, about not knowing how to start again. Nothing came out right. So he just talked, the way he used to talk to his dog before the dog died. About the pain, about Sophia, about feeling like a man buried alive long before the statue ever was. And somewhere between the second and third beer he realized he was crying, ugly, shoulder-shaking sobs that tore out of him like roots pulled from hard ground. He cried for his mother's unanswered rosaries, for the marriage he let slip away, for every morning he had woken up choosing silence over love. When the storm finally passed, he looked up, eyes swollen, and saw, or thought he saw, a woman standing at the edge of the rose bed, not marble. Flesh and blood and blue mantle, barefoot in the grass, moonlight turning the white roses silver around her. She looked exactly like the statue, only alive, breathing, eyes open and fixed on him with a sorrow so tender it felt like forgiveness made visible. Michael's heart stopped, then raced so hard he clutched his chest. He tried to speak, managed only a cracked whisper. "Mom?" The woman smiled the way his mother used to when he brought home a good report card, and the scent of roses flooded the yard until he could taste it on his tongue. Michael knelt in the dirt between the roses, tears cutting clean tracks through the grime on his face. The woman in blue stood no more than 10 feet away, barefoot, mantle brushing the new leaves like moonlight-made cloth. She was exactly the statue, and yet infinitely more. The same gentle tilt of the head, the same clasped hands, but now her eyes were open, deep, dark, ancient eyes that held every sorrow he had ever tried to outrun. There was no halo, no glowing aura, only quiet presence, so complete the cicadas themselves seemed to hush. Before we continue, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let's see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary have reached. And if you haven't yet joined our family, subscribe now, because here, each day, we witness the tender love and mighty power of the Mother of God. He wanted to ask if she was real, if this was a stroke from lifting too much marble, if the pain pills he had finally stopped taking were causing hallucinations. But the questions died unspoken because her gaze already held every answer. She saw the little boy who used to hide behind his mother's skirt at Mass, the teenager who stopped going when friends mocked him, the husband who answered Sophia's tears with silence, the son who never visited the cemetery because graves felt like accusations. She saw the nights he had lain rigid waiting for the pain to crest so high he would finally be justified in ending everything. She saw it all, every defense, every failure, every moment he had chosen numbness over love. And still she looked at him with a tenderness that asked nothing, demanded nothing, only offered. Michael's voice cracked like dry earth after drought. "I'm sorry." The words came out small, almost lost in the rose-scented night, but they were the first honest ones he had spoken in years. "I let everyone down. I let you down. I don't even know how to start fixing it." The woman said nothing, yet he heard her all the same. Not with his ears, but somewhere deeper, the way you hear thunder in your bones before it reaches the sky. A single word, gentle as breath: "Stay." Then she was simply gone. No fading, no footsteps, no rustle of leaves. Only the sudden ordinary darkness of a Houston backyard and the overwhelming fragrance of 1,000 roses blooming at once. Michael stayed on his knees until dawn, afraid to move, afraid the scent would leave, afraid the pain would come roaring back. But the pain stayed quiet, curled up like a dog that had finally been told it was allowed to sleep. The next morning he woke on the grass again, dew soaking his jeans, back aching only the way a normal man's back aches after a hard day, not the white-hot poker that used to greet every sunrise. He stood slowly, testing, waiting for the stab that never arrived. The roses had opened overnight, dozens of them, white and red and blush pink, though he knew for a fact most were months from blooming. Their perfume hung so thick he could taste it on the back of his tongue. He called in sick for the first time in 18 years. Victor didn't argue. For weeks he lived in that backyard. He bought a second-hand patio table, a single chair, and ate every meal beneath her gaze. Neighbors who had never received more than a nod now found him at their doors with bags of rose clippings and shy offers to fix fences he had never noticed were broken. Old Mrs. Hernandez from 2 houses down brought tamales and stayed to pray a rosary she taught him bead by bead, her Spanish slow and patient while he stumbled over the Latin responses his mother used to whisper. When he admitted he had no rosary, she pressed her own into his scarred palm and closed his fingers around it like a secret. The pain continued to retreat, not in dramatic leaps, but in steady, undeniable inches. Mornings that once began with gritted teeth and prescription bottles now began with coffee on the patio and a quiet, "Good morning," spoken to the marble woman who had somehow become flesh long enough to look at him with love. He started leaving the statue's little gate open. People came, first curious neighbors, then strangers who had heard whispers at the Catholic supply store, then entire families on Sunday afternoons. They brought candles, flowers, photographs of sick children. Michael never charged, never preached, only offered the extra chair and a glass of water and the same silence that had once been his prison but now felt like sanctuary. One night, he found the courage to call Sophia. Not to win her back. He knew that door had closed the day she drove away, only to say what needed saying. "I was a ghost when we were married," he told her voicemail first, then again when she called back, voice wary. "I shut you out the way I shut everyone out. I'm sorry, Soph. I understand now why you left. I just needed you to know I finally get it." There was a long pause on the line, then her quiet, "Thank you, Michael. That means more than you know." They didn't make promises. They didn't need to. The conversation ended with the kind of peace that doesn't require a future together to feel complete. A year later, on another blistering Tuesday in September, Michael Anthony Reyes sat in the same excavator cab on a different site, bucket poised to bite into fresh earth. The machine shuddered once, twice, then locked up exactly the way it had that first morning. He smiled, an expression that still felt new on his face, killed the engine, and climbed down, and walked to the trench already knowing what he would not find. Just ordinary rock. Just Texas clay. He stood there a moment anyway, letting the sun burn the back of his neck, and whispered the same quiet words he now spoke every morning. "Thank you for stopping me when I needed to keep digging would have meant missing you." Before we continue, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let's see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary have reached. And if you haven't yet joined our family, subscribe now, because here, each day, we witness the tender love and mighty power of the Mother of God. The backyard shrine had grown without ever meaning to. The little brick knee wall now held a permanent circle of votive candles that neighbors kept lit in shifts. The roses, those impossible, stubborn roses, had climbed the fence, spilled over the roofline, and refused to obey any calendar. blooming in January frost and July scorch alike, filling the night air with a fragrance that drifted 3 streets over and made strangers slow their cars just to breathe it in. People came at all hours, mothers with sick babies, teenagers wrestling addiction, old men facing cancer the way Elena once had. They left notes tucked between the thorns, photographs pressed against the statue's feet, rosaries draped over marble fingers that somehow never grew dusty. Michael never turned anyone away. He simply moved the extra chair into the shade and listened the way he was learning to listen, without fixing, without flinching, only present. His back no longer ruled him. There were still twinges on cold mornings, still days when he took ibuprofen instead of the old opioids. But the monster that once promised to chain him to a wheelchair had shrunk to something small and manageable, like a scar that aches before rain, but no longer a knife in the dark. Doctors called it spontaneous remission and wrote cautious papers. Michael called it Tuesday, the day everything ordinary became extraordinary because love decided to dig its way up from below and meet him where he was. He started going to Mass again, slipping into the back pew of St. Cyril of Alexandria on Saturday evenings, still uncomfortable with crowds but unwilling to miss the moment when the host was lifted and the same warmth he had felt in the fire of roses filled the church. The pastor, Father Miguel, noticed the quiet man with the scarred hands who always stayed after to light a candle beneath the statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe. One evening, he invited Michael for coffee. They talked until the parish hall lights clicked off automatically, and when Michael finally told the whole story, voice low, eyes on his coffee cup, Father Miguel only smiled and said, "She has a habit of finding the ones who think they're too far gone to be found." Now, every May and October, the backyard fills with people for a simple rosary. No loudspeaker, no collection plate, just neighbors on lawn chairs, children on blankets, the scent of roses so thick it feels like breathing inside a cathedral. Michael leads the decades in the same rough voice that once only knew how to say, "I'm fine." And when they reach the Salve Regina, the entire block seems to join in, voices rising over fences and rooftops into the Houston night. He never tried to explain what happened. He never needed to. The roses do it for him, blooming when they shouldn't, perfuming air that by rights should smell only of cut grass and barbecue smoke. The statue still stands exactly where he placed her, marble untouched by hurricane rain or summer hail, face still serene, hands still folded. Only now, if you look very quiet on certain evenings when the wind moves just right through the leaves, you can swear her lips curve a fraction more, as if she is smiling at a secret only the broken know. That sometimes the surest way for heaven to reach a man who has buried his heart is to let him dig until he finds hers waiting patiently beneath everything he thought was lost. Michael still operates an excavator 5 days a week. He still drinks his coffee black. But every morning he steps into the backyard first, touches the cool foot of the statue the way sailors once touched the shore after long voyages, and says the same 3 words he has learned by heart. "I was lost. You stopped the machine. I'm home." Right. Roses, the perfume that changed everything. In the comments if this story has reminded you that sometimes the greatest miracles don't shout. They simply stop us long enough for love to catch up. May the same virgin who waited 3 meters beneath the Texas clay for a man who had forgotten how to hope wait for you. 2. Patient, fragrant, impossible to explain, and absolutely unwilling to let you stay buried.